Okay, let's just get right into it. There's this cultural image we all know, right? The reluctant groom,
Oh,
the
yeah.
guy who's basically being dragged to the altar. We see it in movies, TV, everywhere. But today, we want to look past that stereotype.
Right.
We're going to do a deep dive into the research and figure out what's really behind that hesitation.
That's the mission. We're going to unpack the actual data. We're talking economic, psychological, even legal factors that explain why men often resist marriage.
Even when the data says they benefit the most from it.
Exactly. And we've got a great mix of sources. We have demographic surveys, economic research on divorce laws, sociological studies on well-being. The goal here is to just, find some common ground and clarity on a really challenging topic.
And it's really about the mechanics of the decision. It's not just about feelings. It's about risk, reward, and responsibility. Why is commitment such a heavy lift when, on paper, it seems like such a good deal for men?
That is the question.
So let's start with that central paradox. It's where the stereotype and the data just completely collide.
It really is.
We see all this research saying marriage gives men these huge quantifiable advantages over women, yet they're the ones holding back. So what are these advantages exactly?
Well, they're pretty striking. I mean, when you compare married men to single men, the married guys are consistently happier, they're healthier, they earn more money.
And they live longer.
And they live longer, significantly longer. These are not small effects. These are major life-altering improvements.
But the research also says this is different for women, right? The benefit isn't as clear-cut.
Absolutely. For women, all those benefits, the health, the happiness, they're really strongly tied to the quality of the marriage. If she's in a mediocre or, a really strained marriage, those benefits can just vanish. Sometimes they even go the other way.
But not for men.
That's the fascinating part. Men seem to get a big chunk of those benefits, even from a marriage that's just okay, or even mediocre. Just the stability of the institution itself seems to give them an advantage.
So they don't need a perfect marriage to get a good return on their investment, yet they're the ones who are hesitant. That's perfectly captured in cohabitation studies.
It is. You look at data from cohabiting couples. There's this great study from Norway in the 90s, and there's a clear consensus.
In both partners.
From both partners, they both agree. The men are more hesitant to get married. When you ask who's not ready for the next step, overwhelmingly, it's the guy. Especially childless men living with their partners.
Okay, so here's the really wild part. If being partnered up is so good for men, you'd think single men would be miserable and desperate for commitment.
You would think so, but it's almost the opposite.
How so?
Single women consistently report higher overall well-being than single men. We're talking higher life satisfaction, they're happier with their relationship status, even higher sexual satisfaction.
So single women are actually doing better on their own.
They seem to be much more content, much more self-sufficient. But here's the kicker. Single men report a greater desire for a partner than single women do.
Wait, so they're less happy being single.
Right.
And they want a partner more.
Yes.
Yet they're the ones putting the brakes on marriage, which is the thing that would deliver the biggest benefit.
Exactly. So the resistance isn't about wanting a partner. It's about the perceived cost of that formal contract.
Okay, that brings up the real question then. If the data says marriage will make them happier and healthier, what is it about that piece of paper that feels so costly?
I think the core of it is this belief that marriage requires a huge non-negotiable step up in behavioral commitment. It's a fundamental identity shift that a lot of men just don't feel ready for.
Let's talk about that identity shift. You're going from being a partner to a husband. What does the research say that actually changes?
It's a powerful shift. Men start to really internalize these roles of provider and protector. And it's not just a title change, It has real measurable effects on their behavior.
Like what?
Married men earn more money, they work more hours, and they spend way less time with their friends away from the family.
So their focus just narrows completely.
It has to. Marriage demands that you redirect your time and your resources toward that family unit. It's a trade-off.
It sounds like they're trading personal freedom for being a provider. And that connects right to this fear of losing independence.
Precisely. Cohabitation lets you have a more individualistic lifestyle. Responsibilities can be negotiated. But men worry that marriage imposes this more collectivistic lifestyle where they lose that personal freedom.
And there was that great little anecdote in the source material that kind of sums it all up.
Yeah, that men will joke, but maybe they're not really joking, that a big drawback of marriage is that their wife suddenly gets the right to tell them what to do.
It's funny, but it gets at that fear of losing control.
It does. But here's the irony. The research suggests that that exact thing, that spousal influence that gets them to, stop eating junk food or go to the doctor, that's probably the main source of all those health and longevity benefits.
So they're resisting the very thing that's good for them. They want the longer, healthier life, but not the oversight required to get it.
Exactly. And so cohabitation becomes this really appealing middle ground
All the benefits of companionship.
without the full institutionalized loss of control and the pressure of that identity shift. But it's not all in their heads. It's not just psychological. Marriage has always been, at its core, an economic transaction. And that whole foundation has shifted.
Which brings us to the massive change in the last few decades, right? The rise of what the researchers call women's outside options.
A huge factor. I mean, between 1980 and 2010, you see women's wages go up by about 20% relative to men's, and women started surpassing men in getting college degrees.
So the whole economic landscape just changed.
It totally changes the financial value of marriage.
Can you break down that academic term for us? Pecuniary gains to marriage. What does that actually mean for a couple today?
Sure. It just means the economic benefit you get from specialization.
The classic model: one person works for pay, one person works at home.
Exactly. The man specializes in market work, the woman in homework. That combo used to maximize a couple's total output. But today, when both partners are educated and can earn high incomes, that incentive to specialize it kind of falls away.
So if they're both already working and earning good money while living together, getting married doesn't automatically make the household richer.
Right. The economic advantage you get just by being married is way smaller than it used to be. But men fear that marriage still locks them into that traditional provider role more strongly.
So it's more pressure for them, potentially.
For them, it can feel economically disadvantageous compared to cohabitation, where maybe they just split the bills 50-50. And on the other side of the coin, women's rising options mean they can be a lot more selective.
They don't need to marry for financial security anymore.
So they're selecting out of matches they see as unequal or low quality. The bar for what a man needs to bring to the marriage bargain has gotten much, much higher.
Which you can really see when you look at the most vulnerable economic groups.
Yes, that's where the data is so stark. You see low-skilled women who sometimes choose real financial hardship over marrying a partner they see as a bad match.
So they're willing to pay a price, literally.
A very high price. It shows a willingness to pay, to endure poverty, to rely on welfare, to avoid what they see as the huge non-pecuniary disutility of a bad marriage.
The emotional cost.
The emotional and domestic cost of a bad relationship is now seen as worse than the financial benefit of having a partner. That tells you everything about how the risks have shifted.
So you've got the psychological costs, the eroding economic bargain, and then you layer on top of that the final piece. The legal landscape.
Right, because getting married creates a much higher stakes commitment. It's just harder to get out of.
And that's the whole point, in a way.
It is. It's the critical difference. Cohabiting partners agree that marriage is harder to dissolve, not just because you made a public promise, but because of all the legal hurdles. And that difficulty changes how you think about long-term investments in yourself.
Which gets us to one of the most surprising findings in all of this research: how changing divorce laws actually impacted men's education.
This is a wild one. It's so eye-opening. Researchers looked at what happened when states brought in unilateral or no-fault divorce.
Making it much easier to end a marriage.
Exactly. And they found that when those laws were adopted, the probability of men graduating from college actually dropped by about 2 percentage points.
Wait, hold on. Men were less likely to finish college because divorce got easier. That feels completely backwards.
It does, but it's about risk. Think about it from his perspective. Your education, your advanced degree, that's your human capital. If you invest years and a ton of money into that...
Your earning potential goes way up.
Right. And now that future income is a marital asset. If the marriage ends easily under no-fault divorce, you risk having to split assets and pay alimony based on that high earning potential you just worked so hard for.
So your own long-term investment in yourself becomes a huge financial gamble.
Precisely. The legal change made marriage feel like a bigger financial hazard for men, which actually reduced the incentive to make those big investments in their own human capital.
So the legal system just adds another layer of risk. But there is one legal incentive that pushes the other way, right? Especially with kids.
Absolutely. While marriage increases financial risk in a divorce, it offers much better legal protection for the father-child relationship.
So custody and visitation.
Right. Cohabiting fathers have weaker legal rights than married fathers if the couple splits up. Marriage gives them a much stronger legal claim to stay involved in their kids' lives, and that's a huge incentive to formalize the relationship. So when you pull it all together, what you see is that this male resistance to marriage is, well, it's actually pretty rational. It's a collision of these old, heavy identity expectations, the provider role, losing your independence.
With a completely modern economic and legal reality.
Exactly. The economic value of the marriage contract isn't what it used to be, but the personal and legal risks, especially around finances, feel incredibly high.
So it isn't just men dragging their feet. It's a calculated response to the rising personal costs of that identity shift and the very real hazards in the modern marital contract. It just shows how hard it is to find that common ground when both people are calculating completely different sets of risks.
Which brings us right back to that data on well-being. We know single men are less satisfied, and they actively want a partner. They need the benefits of commitment.
But at the same time, we see women choosing to risk poverty to avoid the profound disutility of a bad match.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative question for you to think about. If the freedom to stay single comes at such a high, measurable cost for both people, are men resisting marriage because they feel like they now shoulder the biggest risk of a forced behavioral and identity change? While at the same time, women are focused on avoiding that huge, non-pecuniary cost, the emotional toll of a bad partnership. What does it say about relationships today when the price of freedom is so high on both sides of the equation?